Top 9 Most Dangerous Gang Members in USP Leavenworth Prison's History. The Bloodstained Yard of Leavenworth. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon inside USP Leavenworth, one of America's oldest federal prisons. But in an instant, the calm shattered. The sound of steel echoed through the yard, not from the gates, but from homemade blades being drawn. A man known only as Toro, a heavily tattooed gang leader from the Mexican Mafia, stood face to face with his rival from the Aryan Brotherhood. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Inmates scattered, guards shouted, and the ground turned red. That yard would later be remembered as one of the deadliest days in Leavenworth's history, a brutal reminder of the power and danger of the men locked behind those concrete walls. And Toro was just one of 9 men who turned Leavenworth into a battlefield. So who were they, the most dangerous gang members ever to walk these cell blocks? Let's go inside, the top 9 most dangerous gang members in USP Leavenworth Prison's history. The ghost of Cell Block D, Michael Toro Ramirez, Mexican Mafia. Before he was feared inside Leavenworth, Toro ran the streets of East Los Angeles. He wasn't just another gangster, he was a strategist. Known for organizing multi-state drug routes from inside prison walls, Toro became one of the Mexican Mafia's most influential men. When he arrived at Leavenworth in the early 2000s, he didn't waste time. Within weeks, he'd built alliances with other Latino inmates, creating an invisible communication web that stretched through phone smuggling, coded letters, and bribed staff. But what made Toro truly feared was his control over discipline. One inmate once said, "Toro didn't have to raise his voice. If he looked at you twice, you knew you were done." The yard riot that made him infamous began over what seemed like nothing, a gambling debt. But in Leavenworth, nothing was small. Rumors say Toro ordered the hit not to settle money, but to test loyalty among his crew. The fight left 2 inmates injured, one in critical condition, and the yard locked down for 72 hours. Toro was later transferred to ADX Florence, the federal supermax, where he remains under permanent lockdown. But his legend still echoes through Leavenworth's corridors, whispered by younger inmates who never even met him. They say if you mention his name too loud, bad luck follows. The Aryan enforcer, Billy Steel Dugan. Billy Dugan earned his nickname, Steel, not because of the bars around him, but because of his cold, unbreakable nature. Before prison, he was a biker gang enforcer known for extortion and arms trafficking. Inside Leavenworth, he became the muscle behind the Aryan Brotherhood, the kind of man who never spoke much, but everyone obeyed. Steel wasn't loud or dramatic. He was methodical. Every move he made served a purpose, from orchestrating protection deals to arranging fights that kept control of the white inmate population. Guards called him the Quiet Storm. In 1998, Steele's name hit the headlines after an undercover investigation exposed how he coordinated smuggled weapons using visitors and coded Bible verses. The FBI later found that Steele had ties stretching as far as the federal penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. But his most feared act came during a late-night lockdown. A rival inmate from another white gang refused to follow his orders. The next morning, that inmate was found severely beaten, unconscious, with a message carved into his bunk, "Order restored." From that day, nobody questioned Steele's authority again. Even after he was transferred out of Leavenworth, his rules remained, followed by men who still claimed they answered to Steele. The blood-set commander, Dante "Red Dog" Collins. Red Dog didn't just run a crew, he turned the Bloods inside Leavenworth into a business. Originally from New Jersey, Dante Collins was known for charisma and control. Guards described him as the kind of guy who could make peace in 1 hour and start a riot the next. Collins started small, controlling contraband cigarettes and commissary items. But soon he organized a trade network that stretched through multiple prisons. With coded phone calls and hidden ledgers, Red Dog managed to turn the prison economy into a multi-thousand-dollar operation. But money wasn't what made him dangerous. It was influence. In 2011, an incident known as the Red Line Riot broke out, a massive brawl between Bloods and members of another group after one of Collins' lieutenants was attacked. Surveillance footage later showed Red Dog standing in the center of the chaos, completely calm, hands behind his back, as guards rushed in. He didn't move, he just watched. And when the chaos ended, the man who started it was gone, moved to protective custody. Collins never spoke a word about it. Years later, other inmates admitted that nothing happened inside Leavenworth without Red Dog's approval. Even the guards, some quietly admitted, respected his intelligence, even if they feared his power. The silent executioner, Darius, Bonecrusher, Miles, Gangster disciples. Darius Miles wasn't built like most men. Standing 6'4" with arms covered in tattoos of skulls and names, he earned the nickname Bonecrusher long before he ever saw the inside of Leavenworth. On the streets of Chicago, he was known for running enforcement for the Gangster disciples, collecting debts, settling scores, and keeping order through fear. But inside Leavenworth, Bonecrusher evolved into something far more calculating. Unlike the others, he didn't waste energy with loud threats or flexing power. He was quiet, almost polite. But that silence was what made him terrifying. He spoke only when necessary, and when he did, people listened. His influence began to grow after a violent power struggle between rival factions of the disciples in 2007. The fight broke out during mealtime, with trays flying and guards rushing in, but somehow Bonecrusher remained untouched. Witnesses said it looked like chaos parted around him. When it was over, 2 gang shot callers were removed from the yard, and Darius Miles became the undisputed leader. Bonecrusher's rule was simple: no disrespect, no weakness. He built a structured system that operated like a military unit. His men used coded hand signals, burned notes after reading, and moved contraband like trained soldiers. Guards began noticing the unusual discipline among his crew. They didn't talk back, didn't fight unnecessarily, but when a command was given, they executed it with precision. Even rival gangs admitted that Bonecrusher was the kind of leader you don't cross, not because he's loud, but because you'll never see it coming when you do. One former officer recalled an eerie story. There was a time when the cameras caught him sitting alone in the rec yard, not moving for 2 hours. Just watching. A week later, an inmate he had problems with got transferred, without anyone ever filing a report. We never knew how, but we all knew why. Eventually, after a string of violent incidents connected to his circle, Bonecrusher was placed in solitary confinement for an indefinite term. But even from the box, messages still moved, orders still flowed. His reach extended beyond his cell door, proving that in Leavenworth, silence could be louder than chaos. And yet, even Bonecrusher had someone he feared, someone whose name carried weight across every racial and gang line inside the prison. That man was known as the politician. The politician, Marcus Mack Jefferson, Vice Lords. Marcus Jefferson, or Mack, wasn't the biggest, nor the most violent man in Leavenworth. But he was one of the most dangerous thinkers ever locked inside. He earned the nickname, the politician, because he could talk his way into, or out of, almost anything. Before prison, Mack had been involved with the Vice Lords in Chicago, but instead of muscle, he specialized in manipulation. He studied law while serving his time, helping other inmates file appeals and grievances, a service that earned him favors, protection, and access. Within a year, Mack had the loyalty of not just vice lords, but members from rival gangs, correctional officers, and even some staff. He could start or stop violence with a word. He knew who owed who, which guards were in debt, and which inmates were planning trouble, all before it happened. When the administration tried cracking down on his influence, Mack responded not with violence, but with paperwork. He filed so many legal motions and grievances that the prison's internal review system was overwhelmed for months. Guards started calling him the warden without a badge. But his real power came from negotiation. He orchestrated ceasefires between rival groups, trading peace for power. If 2 gangs wanted to avoid a lockdown, they went through Mack. In 2013, a major lockdown nearly broke out after a fight between Latino and Black inmates. Mack stepped in and somehow convinced both groups to back down within 48 hours. No one knows exactly what he promised, but when the dust settled, he had control over the prison's most valuable commodity, information. Mack didn't rule with fear, one former inmate later said. He ruled with secrets. And secrets are what really run a prison. Rumors say even after being transferred to another facility, Mack's influence still echoes through Leavenworth. Inmates still use some of his coded slang and trade system. He proved that danger inside prison isn't just about violence, it's about control. But Leavenworth's story isn't just about masterminds and manipulators. It's also home to some of the most unpredictable, uncontrollable men to ever breathe behind bars, the kind whose rage made even guards afraid to open their cells. The uncontrollable fury, Leon Mad Dog Harris Cripps. If you ask any old-timer who survived the 1990s at USP Leavenworth which name still sends chills down their spine, they'll say it without hesitation, Mad Dog. Leon Harris, better known by his gang name Mad Dog, came from South Central Los Angeles, where his reputation as a Crip enforcer was built on chaos. Unlike Toro or Bonecrusher, he wasn't interested in structure, money, or long-term power. Mad Dog lived for fear. From the day he arrived in Leavenworth, the energy in the cell block changed. He was unpredictable, smiling one moment, flipping a table the next. Even seasoned guards said his stare felt inhuman. He had the kind of rage that didn't need a reason. The first major incident came only 2 weeks after his arrival. During a simple argument in the chow hall, another inmate made a comment about LA gangs. Mad Dog snapped, flipping his tray, lunging across the table, and sparking a full-blown riot that took 5 guards and 2 chemical sprays to control. From then on, everyone learned one rule: never make eye contact too long with Mad Dog. In the following months, he attacked rival gang members, disrespected officers, and refused to follow any order. He spent more time in solitary than in general population. But what truly made him infamous was how no punishment ever broke him. Guards said he came out of solitary smiling, like he enjoyed the isolation. He had a switch, a retired correctional officer once recalled. You could be talking calm with him about breakfast and then, bam, he'd flip. It wasn't anger. It was like he became someone else. In 1997, Leavenworth's control unit had to be redesigned after one of Mad Dog's outbursts led to the destruction of 2 reinforced doors. His strength, fueled by raw rage, was legendary. Even other violent inmates avoided being placed near his cell. But despite his chaos, some inmates weirdly respected him. They said Mad Dog represented pure freedom, someone who couldn't be controlled by the system. Even the warden once described him as the storm that never ends. Eventually, he was transferred under special management to the federal supermax in Florence, Colorado. But Leavenworth never forgot him. Some still say that when fights break out, you can hear inmates yell, "Go Mad Dog on him." A grim tribute to the man who turned fury into a legacy. The connector, Reggie Slim Hawkins, Black Guerrilla family. Reggie Hawkins, known as Slim, wasn't the kind of inmate you'd notice right away. He was tall, soft-spoken, and often seen reading books in the library. But what most people didn't know was that Slim was one of the most connected men in Leavenworth's modern history, a key member of the Black Guerrilla family, BGF. The BGF wasn't like most gangs. They were organized, politically aware, and disciplined, founded on unity and resistance rather than random violence. And Slim embodied that philosophy perfectly. He was calm, intellectual, and dangerous in ways that didn't involve physical confrontation. His power came from communication. Slim managed to build a secret network that connected inmates from coast to coast. Baltimore, Oakland, Atlanta, and Leavenworth all flowed through him. Using coded letters and encrypted phone messages disguised as religious correspondence, he kept the BGF's national communication alive. Guards eventually discovered that Slim had been behind a sophisticated operation that coordinated protests, hunger strikes, and internal discipline across multiple federal facilities. One investigator even called him the most intelligent inmate we've ever dealt with. But what made Slim truly dangerous wasn't just his brain, it was his loyalty. If you were BGF, he'd protect you like family. If you weren't, you didn't exist to him. He once wrote a line in a confiscated note that summed him up perfectly. "They can chain our hands, but not our words." Slim's network eventually unraveled after an informant exposed one of his coded message systems in 2016. He was moved to a communications-restricted unit, but even after his removal, the systems he built continued to operate under new leadership. Even now, BGF affiliates inside Leavenworth still refer to some of his old codes as slim talk. His influence didn't just change the prison, it changed how communication and unity worked behind federal bars. And yet, among all the thinkers and fighters, there was one man who stood above everyone else, a legend whose name became a warning to guards, inmates, and even new arrivals. They called him the King of Leavenworth. The King of Leavenworth, Raymond King Ray Delgado, Latin Kings. In every prison, there's always one man whose name feels larger than the walls themselves, the inmate whose power stretches beyond his own race, gang, or cell block. At USP Leavenworth, that man was Raymond King Ray Delgado. Raymond wasn't your typical gang member. He didn't yell, didn't brag, and didn't fight unless he had to. Yet everyone, from the guards to rival gangs, knew one simple truth: nothing moved in Leavenworth without King Ray's permission. Before prison, Delgado ran with the Latin Kings in Chicago. On the streets, he was known for strategy, a man who could turn chaos into order. When he arrived at Leavenworth in the early 2000s, the prison was in constant turmoil, endless stabbings, racial fights, and power shifts. Within 3 years, that changed. Ray had turned chaos into control. With a weapon more dangerous than any shank, influence. He started by bringing structure. Every member of the Latin Kings inside the facility had duties: runners, suppliers, watchers, and even negotiators. They followed schedules, codes, and written oaths. Ray introduced order where none existed, and soon other gangs followed the same format, just to keep up. Guards noticed a strange calm across the yards. The violence didn't stop, it just became organized. Every act had a reason, a target, and a message. He didn't need to yell or threaten, one former guard said. He'd just look at you and you knew he'd already planned 5 moves ahead. Ray's empire extended beyond gang control. He managed contraband like a business tycoon, running the trade in tobacco, phones, and commissary goods. He used corrupt staff, coded messages, and even manipulated the inmate payroll system to hide profits. When a federal investigation later uncovered part of his network, agents were stunned to find ledgers written like corporate reports, with profit percentages, logistics notes, and coded board meetings inside the library. But the most chilling proof of his power came in 2012. 2 rival factions inside Leavenworth planned simultaneous hits, one targeting Ray's crew, the other aiming at the Aryan Brotherhood. The situation was primed for a bloodbath. Somehow, within 24 hours, both attacks were called off. No one knows what was said, but multiple sources confirmed Ray personally met with the Aryan shot caller that morning. After that, the yard stayed silent for months. When investigators asked inmates how one man could stop a riot that big, they got the same answer. He's the king. You don't go against the king. Raymond King Ray Delgado eventually became the subject of multiple federal indictments for running a criminal enterprise from inside Leavenworth. But even after he was sent to Florence ADX, his shadow still ruled. Inmates who never met him still used his name like law, King Ray's rules. He taught one powerful lesson that still echoes through prison walls today. You can cage a man, but you can't cage influence. The butcher of Leavenworth, Anthony Tone Morales, independent. Not all danger inside Leavenworth came from organized gangs. Some men operated completely alone and were feared by everyone. Anthony Tone Morales was one of them. Tone was different. He wasn't connected to any gang, didn't answer to anyone, and didn't care about colors or alliances. He was a one-man army, unpredictable, violent, and fearless. Before prison, he'd worked as a butcher in Kansas City, hence his nickname, the Butcher. But what made him truly terrifying was how calm he was before violence. He'd joke, laugh, and share food, and then explode without warning. In 2005, Tone became infamous after a kitchen altercation turned into one of the most brutal attacks in Leavenworth's history. Reports said he fashioned a weapon out of sharpened kitchen tools and attacked 2 rival inmates within seconds. No one ever knew why, and Tone never explained. He was sentenced to life, But that didn't stop him from controlling a small circle of inmates who admired his fearlessness. Unlike the gang leaders, Tone had no ambition for power. His rule was chaos. He'd protect one inmate one day and threaten the same man the next. Guards kept him isolated for most of his sentence, but his legend grew, whispered in the dark like a ghost story. In a place where politics ruled, Tone was the wild card. Proof that even in the most structured prison, fear could still wear a human face. He didn't lead men, one officer said. He led fear. Tone was eventually moved to permanent solitary after multiple violent incidents. Yet, even years later, inmates still told newcomers, "If you hear someone humming in the dark, don't look. It might be Tone." From the street generals like Toro and Steel, to masterminds like Mack and pure chaos like Mad Dog and Tone, USP Leavenworth has seen every kind of danger, from the mind to the blade. Each of these men shaped the prison's history in their own way, leaving behind scars, stories, and warnings carved into the concrete. But Leavenworth isn't done yet. Even today, new leaders rise, new alliances form, and the cycle continues. Because in a place like Leavenworth, power never dies. It just finds a new name. The legacy of fear and control. Leavenworth isn't just a prison. It's a story, a living, breathing organism built from fear, survival, and control. Every brick, every hallway, and every steel door carries echoes of the men who ruled it, not with titles or freedom, but with reputation. From Toro's cold command to Steel's discipline, from Red Dog's empire to Mack's mind games, Leavenworth's power wasn't written in paperwork. It was written in blood, silence, and strategy. These men weren't heroes. They were warnings. Each one a reminder of how power can twist, grow, and survive even behind the thickest concrete walls. Because inside Leavenworth, danger doesn't die, it adapts. It learns. It waits for its next name, its next leader, its next chapter. And while the world outside moves on, those old cell blocks still whisper at night. Stories about men who built kingdoms out of fear, alliances out of necessity, and legends out of violence. You can lock a man in a cell, but you can't lock away the influence he leaves behind. This was the story of Leavenworth's most dangerous. The men who made history without ever leaving their cages. If you found this story eye-opening, dark, and unforgettable, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories from the hidden corners of America's prison system. Because next time, we'll take you deeper into another prison, another story, and another world where danger never sleeps.